Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where everything stinks, everyone's traumatized, and somehow, you're still alive. That's right. We're heading back to 1350, shortly after the Black Death has finished doing its grim little dance across Europe. The air is thick with the scent of burnt herbs and panic. Your neighbors are mostly ghosts, and the rats? Oh, they're thriving. Picture this. You've survived a plague that wiped out, roughly a third to half of everyone you've ever known. You probably watched your cousins cough themselves into oblivion, buried your neighbors in shallow pits, and now, somehow, you're supposed to just get back to normal? You probably won't survive this, emotionally. But hey, at least you've got options now, kind of. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere specific, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice as you trudge into the muddy remnants of your village is the silence. Not the peaceful kind. This is the silence of a place recently emptied of the living. No gossiping neighbors, no shouting kids. Just the occasional flap of a crow's wings, and maybe, if you're lucky, the soft snort of a horse that hasn't decided to die of grief yet. You look down. The ground is still churned up from the last round of plague burials. They never quite got around to digging all the way down. You can still see the edge of a foot sticking out from a hurried grave. That's normal now. You step over it. People who survive the plague don't walk with a bounce. They shuffle. The muscles ache in a permanent kind of way. And not just from grief. Your body has literally been through a siege, fever, vomiting, boils that looked like angry grapes, and now it just sort of exists. But congratulations. You're one of the lucky ones. A walking relic. Not that you feel lucky. Your house is standing sure, but your parents aren't inside it. There's some broken crockery on the floor. A smell that never quite left after Aunt Marga's last days. And possibly a raccoon squatter who refuses to pay rent. You eat whatever you can find. Mostly dried beans and that one onion you forgot to harvest. It's spicy in a way that onion shouldn't be. Outside, the fields have gone wild. Wheat has turned to weeds. Cows, if you're lucky enough to find one still upright, moo with a kind of existential dread. Historians still argue whether the initial collapse brought brief moments of peace. Less noise, less hierarchy, less expectation. But for you, standing barefoot in the slush of human despair, it feels more like being the only guest at the world's worst surprise party. And then, there are the smells. You thought you were used to bad odors. What with chamber pots and open, sewers and your Uncle Rorik's natural musk. But post-plague Europe adds a new level. It's like a stew of rot, mold, sweat, and 1,000 failed attempts at masking it with lavender sachets. You stuff a cloth soaked in vinegar up your nose. Doesn't help, but it makes you feel proactive. You head toward the town center, if you can call it that. Half the shops are shuttered. The apothecary is gone. Ran off when the bodies piled too high. The baker, dead. The blacksmith, also dead. but someone's using his forge to melt down church bells for fun. That's new. A few other survivors are shuffling around like you. They don't make eye contact. Who wants to bond when literally everyone's dealing with unprocessed trauma and bad teeth? And then, just as you start wondering if this is it, just you, the crows, and the onions, a cart rolls by. 2 wheels, 1 donkey, and a man yelling, "Bring out your dead!" out of pure habit. He hasn't realized the rush is over. You wave. He waves back. Neither of you smiles. You find an old stool and sit, watching the clouds. They move slowly. There's no rush anymore. No taxes to pay. No lords breathing down your neck. For now. It's the one upside. When half the aristocracy dies, the feudal system sort of collapses like a flan in a hot oven. You're free. Kind of. But also unemployed. Also kind of unwashed. And definitely not emotionally prepared to rebuild civilization. You nap under the broken archway of the church. Not because you're religious, but because it's one of the few buildings with a roof still attached. The stained glass window survived. It shows Saint Sebastian with arrows in him, gazing skyward like, "Ugh, again?" You relate. Even sleep isn't restful. You dream in smells and sounds, bells ringing for the dead, dogs howling, the priest sobbing into his wine. When you wake, you wonder if maybe it'd be easier to just walk into the forest and befriend squirrels. Live in a tree. Eat moss. But then you hear something. Singing. A single voice, off-key, but real. A woman pulling weeds from a neglected garden, humming a tune about bread. She sees you, nods, goes back to weeding. Maybe you're not completely alone. You get up. Your legs ache like you ran a marathon through mud, but you find yourself moving anyway. Towards something. A person, a plan, a turnip. Who knows? You reach a house that used to belong to your friend Thomas. He's gone. Probably one of the first to go, but his sheep are still around. They seem confused but content. You name one of them Gregory. He looks like a Gregory. As the sky dims, you find an apple tree with one sad, wrinkled apple still hanging on. It's probably wormy. You eat it anyway. You're still alive, that's something. And tomorrow, you'll figure out what surviving actually means. But for now, Gregory curls up beside you. The woman keeps humming across the garden, and the stars blink open one by one like distant, disinterested witnesses. The next morning begins with the sound of chickens arguing in a nearby bush. You're not sure whose chickens they were before, but now they're yours. Or no one's. Or maybe they've declared a small, feathered republic. Either way, you watch them for a moment, their little heads bobbing with purpose. They seem to have adjusted to the new normal better than you have. And what is the new normal exactly? Well, it's something like this. No jobs, no rules, and very little hygiene. Welcome to post-plague Europe, where social systems have collapsed, but unfortunately, so has the soap supply. You trudge into what's left of the village square, where someone's made a half-hearted attempt to organize a meeting. It's mostly just 5 survivors standing in a loose circle and looking confused. One man's wearing a jester's hat. Another is barefoot and trying to sell dried frog skins as protective amulets. No one tells him to stop. This is what local governance looks like now. It used to be some minor noble's job to tell everyone what to do. Plant this. Give me that. Don't breathe near my horse. But he didn't survive the summer. Or maybe he did and ran off to become a hermit. Either way, the power vacuum is real. And into that vacuum rush a variety of questionable personalities. There's Elsbeth, a weaver turned self-declared mayor of the mud. She insists everyone take turns watching the communal soup pot. There's also Martin, a failed monk who's now selling holy breadcrumbs for a penny apiece. And then there's you, trying not to make eye contact so you don't get nominated for something. Historians still argue whether this chaos sparked real democracy in some regions, or whether it was just unqualified people getting way too excited about yelling orders. Either way, the vibe is part survival, part low-budget Renaissance fair. Meanwhile, jobs as you knew them, field laborer, cooper, miller, etc., have kind of evaporated. Not that people aren't working. It's just that now it's all very DIY. If you want flour, you better grow the wheat, grind it yourself, and hope the rats don't beat you to it. If you want clothes, you're sewing them out of old curtains and prayer flags. You try to help out, but it's hard to know what anyone needs. Your neighbor Alric is building a fence around a pile of compost and calling it his herbal sanctuary. You offer to fetch water, but the well smells suspiciously like something fell in. Possibly a goat. Possibly two goats. Bathing? That's a luxury reserved for festivals and near-death experiences. The river is cold, fast, and slightly cursed. You splash your face, mostly out of tradition, and try not to think about how many bodies passed through here last month. And it's not just the dirt, it's the general aura. Everyone carries the smell of sweat, despair, and old onion soup. Perfume has become both precious and deeply suspicious. Some people believe it traps the plague inside you. Others think it wards off bad spirits. You settle for rubbing crushed rosemary on your wrists and hoping for the best. Every now and then, a traveling merchant or tinker rolls through, usually with a wheel falling off and a sack of miracle powders that are definitely just ground chalk. You buy one anyway, just to remember what it feels like to exchange things. By mid-afternoon, you're helping dig a new latrine trench. Glamorous, you know. But someone has to do it. And it's better than watching Elsbeth argue with a goose she insists is her reincarnated uncle. The ground is heavy, damp, and reluctant. Like it too is tired of all this. Your hands blister quickly, unused to this much labor. You used to be a tanner's apprentice. Indoors, smelly, sure, but structured. Now you're just one more dirt-covered survivor with a shovel and no idea what comes next. Lunch is communal. Old cabbage soup with a suspiciously meaty chunk that no one questions. You sit around the fire, slurping in silence, listening to the wind pass through the broken rafters of the chapel nearby. It whistles like it's trying to remember a tune. Someone brings out a jug of weak ale. It's mostly water, but it dulls the edge a bit. There's a joke about lice. Yes, they're still thriving. And a story about a man who got bitten by a cow and now thinks he's a prophet. You laugh, because what else is there to do? Afterwards, you walk through the empty cottages, seeing what might be salvaged. A cracked spoon here, a pot with only minor burn marks there. You find a small carved figure in the rubble. Maybe a saint, maybe just a weirdly muscular mouse. You keep it. Mascots are important now. The sun begins to dip, casting everything in gold. It should be beautiful, but the light reveals more than it hides. Broken doors, stained walls, the lingering signs of hasty exits. You wonder if this is what rebuilding looks like. Tiny acts of normalcy against a backdrop of silent ruins. A child appears, barefoot and serious, holding a broom 3 times her size. She sweeps dust from the chapel steps with focused intensity. She doesn't look up. She's got a job, and that makes her one of the lucky ones. You remember what your grandmother used to say? If you don't know what to do, clean something, even if it's just your soul. Not that she followed that advice. She was mostly wine and superstition. But still, you sweep. As darkness falls, the stars seem too close. The night air smells like damp earth and wood smoke. And somewhere, someone starts to sing again. The same broken tune, the same broken world. But you're still here, still moving, still, somehow, hopeful. The next morning begins with the unmistakable sound of a sermon, but not the good kind. It's not coming from a church, or even a particularly devout person. It's Hugo, the guy who used to dig graves before he decided to reinvent himself as a community leader. Now he's standing on a slightly tilted crate in the center of the village, wrapped in what appears to be an old curtain, waving a stick like it's a holy relic. You find yourself drawn to the commotion, not because you particularly care what Hugo has to say, but because post-plague Europe has the entertainment value of wet parchment. So when someone starts yelling with conviction, you follow the noise. Hugo's voice booms through the morning fog. "We are the chosen, the cleansed," he bellows, dramatically swinging his arms like he's conducting a choir of ghosts. He pauses for effect, then adds, "And fashion is reborn." You squint. Is that a dead fox tied to his belt? This is what happens when half the population dies. Power and influence aren't handed down. They're claimed, loudly and with absolutely no qualifications. Grave diggers, rat catchers, and those weird guys who used to whisper at pigeons in the square have all stepped forward to fill the void. Hugo, to his credit, has charisma. And apparently, access to a lot of fabric scraps. The crowd is small, but captivated. Mostly because he's promising free bread and a new order. No one knows what that means. You suspect he doesn't either. But he's loud, and he's got a stick. And in this weird new world, that's enough. Historians still argue whether this type of local charisma helped create the seeds of early grassroots movements, or if it was just unqualified loudmouths, playing post-apocalyptic dress-up. Either way, it's undeniably captivating to watch. Hugo's latest decree? A communal bath day. You almost choke on your piece of stale barley bread. Bath day, in this economy? But he insists, it's about spiritual cleansing. And maybe, you suspect, getting people to finally scrub off the visible sadness. You agree to help prepare the bathwater, which mostly involves hauling buckets from the river and hoping you don't fall in. It's cold. It smells faintly of fish regret. But it's water. And that's what you've got. People actually show up, hesitantly, wrapped in whatever cloth they have left. One woman has turned an old tapestry into a towel. A man arrives wearing nothing but a large cabbage leaf and hope. Everyone's a little unsure of the etiquette. Do you talk while bathing? Do you pretend you're not scrubbing with the same water someone else just cried into? You sit on a rock, watching the absurdity unfold. It's almost beautiful. This awkward, semi-naked collection of plague survivors, trying to feel human again. One man brings a chunk of soap so old it crumbles. Another uses crushed rosemary. Someone else just kind of swishes and prays. And then, there's Hugo, standing on the riverbank, arms raised like a soggy prophet. "We are reborn," he yells, slipping slightly on the moss. "We reject the filth of the past." A goat bleats in agreement, or disagreement. Hard to say with goats. Later, you help hang wet clothes on a sagging rope between two trees. The garments are threadbare, mismatched, and mostly gray, but they flap in the breeze like strange little flags of resistance. Afterwards, Hugo insists on hosting a feast, which is a generous word for what you're served. A stew of questionable roots, mystery meat, and what might be the last of the spring onions. Still, it's warm. And after a shared bath, somehow everything tastes just a little better. There's music, too. A woman named Bruna, who used to sing at weddings, brings out a lute that's missing 3 strings. She plays anyway. The tune is wobbly, but the rhythm is enough to get a few people clapping. Someone tries to dance. It's unclear whether it's a new dance or just the result of an old leg injury. But it brings laughter. You look around at the flickering firelight, the patchwork clothes, the tired smiles. It's like a pageant put on by people who barely survived the apocalypse. But they showed up anyway. That night, you sleep near the fire. Not because it's warm, it mostly smolders, but because it's where people... The next morning, someone has painted a crude mural on the chapel wall. A rainbow, a plague cart, and what appears to be a smiling skeleton giving a thumbs up. It's unclear if this is meant to be inspirational or deeply ironic. Possibly both. You find yourself getting used to the chaos. There's a rhythm to it now. Wake up, scrape together food, listen to someone make a strange announcement, try not to get bit by anything. Occasionally laugh, occasionally cry, always survive. You even start offering suggestions at the morning meetings. You, who once hid behind a stack of old firewood to avoid being asked to sweep. Now you're proposing repairs to the grain store. People listen. Hugo nods like he understands. He doesn't. But that's okay. You're not building utopia. You're rebuilding something. One absurd decision at a time. You're bent over a sack of turnips when the news arrives. The bishop is dead. Or, well, one of the bishops. Maybe a minor bishop. Possibly just a bishop's assistant. The details are fuzzy, carried in by a tired-looking pilgrim who smells like candle wax and regret. But the headline is clear. The church is unraveling. It was already fraying at the edges. Priests vanished or died. Monasteries locked themselves up or turned into soup kitchens, and holy relics got mysteriously misplaced. You remember the village priest, Father Wolfram, who used to warn children that sneezing was an invitation to the devil. He ran off during the second wave, and was last seen carrying a gold chalice and a sack of turnips that looked suspiciously like yours. So now the pilgrim, an older woman with a limp and a suspiciously well-fed donkey, tells you the church is scrambling. Papal envoys ride from town to town trying to reassert control, handing out indulgences like candy and desperately trying to look like they're still in charge. You picture it. Sweaty men in heavy robes, trying to inspire reverence while dodging roving dogs and bad stew. Historians still argue whether this ecclesiastical collapse opened the door for the Reformation, or simply accelerated pre-existing rot. You don't know about all that. You just know people are confused. Prayers feel different now, less like sacred rituals, and more like long-distance messages sent to an increasingly absent landlord. Still, people cling to the old ways. Some gather, daily at the half-burnt chapel, kneeling on scorched floorboards, whispering to cracked statues of saints. Others wander out into the woods and light candles at trees, convinced that the divine has relocated to more natural settings. There's a man who insists mushrooms can carry your sins to heaven, but no one really likes to sit next to him anymore. The sacramental wine is gone. Communion has turned into a soggy crust of bread and a communal mug of bitter herb tea. Not exactly holy, but somehow comforting. You take a sip and pretend it tastes like salvation. And then there are the new preachers. You hear one before you see him. A hoarse voice shouting from atop a cart painted with red crosses and scribbles, in Latin that are either religious verses or soup recipes. He calls himself Brother Matthew, though he also answers to that shouting man. His sermons are fire and fear, the kind that blame everything on moral decay and claim God speaks directly through cabbage leaves. His breath smells like fermented beets. He's not the only one. Across the countryside, there are whispers of self-declared prophets, flagellants who roam from village to village, whipping themselves in public squares and singing dirges about the end times. One even showed up here briefly, demanding people lie in ditches for a full day to cleanse the world's soul. You did it, mostly because it was Tuesday, and there wasn't much else going on. Afterwards, you lay on the grass and stared up at the sky, half listening to the buzzing of bees, and half wondering if religion was always this confusing. You remember when it was just about showing up on Sundays, confessing to that thing with the butter churn, and going home with cleanish hands. Now it feels like everyone's making it up as they go. You even tried praying once. An honest prayer, whispered, into the smoky twilight, asking not for miracles but just for something to make sense again. No lightning bolt, no divine vision, but a toad hops onto your foot and just sits there. You decide it counts. At dinner, Hugo declares himself High Deacon of the Sacred Leftovers. He means it as a joke. Probably. But someone draws up a crude badge for him anyway, and the next day he's waving it around while distributing bowls of onion gruel. It's oddly reassuring. Not accurate, not canonically sound, but reassuring. People begin inventing rituals. One woman insists you must spin 3 times before entering the communal hut, to confuse lingering spirits. Another leaves dried flowers at doorways. A boy draws protective eyes on every available surface using charcoal. Your favorite is the daily humming ritual, a quiet, sustained note sung before meals. It started as a joke, but now everyone joins in. It's haunting and oddly beautiful. You start noticing how people look at the sky differently now. Less like they expect divine intervention, more like they're checking whether it still feels like watching, whether the stars might blink back one night whether the clouds might finally carry a message other than more rain. The old religious hierarchy might be collapsing, but in its place is something rawer, messier, strangely intimate. You think of Bruna, who lights 3 candles every night. One for her dead father, one for the future, and one for no reason at all. The third is for whatever I forgot, she says, smiling softly. One night, someone finds an old psalter half buried in mud. The pages are stained, the edges torn, but it smells like ink and time. You take turns reading from it by firelight. The verses don't always make sense, but the rhythm is soothing. Sacred poetry for people who've forgotten what peace feels like. Later, the same pilgrim woman returns. She says some towns are rebuilding churches with grass-thatched roofs and open walls, so God can hear better. Others are turning them into schools, hospitals, or, strangely, bee sanctuaries. The holy and the practical are merging in odd, hopeful ways. You help clean out the chapel the next morning. Sweep the dust, prop up the altar, light a tiny candle. You even find a scrap of stained glass, just a fragment, the wing of an angel or maybe the tail of a very enthusiastic dove. You hold it up to the light, and for a moment, everything glows blue and gold. You realize you're not trying to bring back what was. You're building something new, and it's okay if you don't have the right words, the perfect rituals, or even a fully functioning theology. All you need is intention, a place to sit quietly, and maybe a toad or two. You're eating soup when the screaming starts. Now before you panic, which is understandable, given the post-plague ambiance, it turns out to be more of a joyful shriek than a terrified one. At first, a young boy runs into the square waving something in his hand and yelling, "It's back! It's back!" It's not a wolf. It's not more plague. It's trade. Yes, miraculously, absurdly. Someone has shown up with a cart full of goods, real goods, textiles, spices, even salt that hasn't been scraped from the bottom of a barrel. You blink in disbelief. The boy wasn't exaggerating. Someone's trading again. You abandon your soup and jog to the village gate. There. He is an actual merchant. He wears a wide-brimmed hat with a feather, a long coat that was fashionable a decade ago, and a face that says he's survived multiple ambushes and at least one encounter with an aggressive goose. His name is Thomas, and his donkey's name is Margarita. Margarita looks unimpressed. Tomas is a survivor of the trade routes that mostly collapsed during the plague. He's made it by zigzagging through villages like yours, scavenging, swapping, and somehow convincing people that salt is worth a dead chicken and a blessing. His cart is stacked with treasures, rusty knives, thimbles, ribbons, coarse wool, dried apricots, a cracked mirror. A cracked mirror. You haven't seen your own face in months. You peer into the broken glass, tilt your head, and barely recognize the dirt-smudged eyes staring back. It's oddly grounding. You give Thomas your last candle stub and a carved spoon in exchange for it. It feels like a bargain. As word spreads, people pour out of their homes with bits of dried fish, old buttons, and enthusiasm. Tomas haggles gently, clearly enjoying the performance of trade as much as the transaction. And just like that, commerce returns. Not in the structured, tax-documented, ledger-based way of the old days, but in this messy, joyful, borderline chaotic bartering dance. Historians still argue whether the post-plague surge in local trade accelerated the collapse of feudal economies, or simply gave people a reason to talk again. Either way, you're too busy watching someone try to trade a poem for a pair of shoes to care much about macroeconomics. It isn't just Thomas. The following week, another trader arrives. This one has honey and news. She says the roads are safer now, relatively, and towns are beginning to reopen their markets. Not the big fairs yet, but small gatherings. People standing behind blankets laid on the ground, offering carved toys, dried herbs, and whatever else survived the end of the world. Inspired, your village organizes its first market day. Hugo declares himself Lord of the Tarp, which apparently means he gets to unroll a blanket in the middle of the square and place 3 carrots and a rock on it. The rock is for dramatic effect. He insists it's decorative. You contribute a few wooden beads, some dried mushrooms, and a roughly stitched pouch made from an old sock. It sells quickly. To someone who thinks it's a hat, the market is a masterpiece of absurdity. One woman tries to trade her husband's left boot for a thimble and a piece of cheese. A child offers riddles in exchange for petting your neighbor's goat. Bruna sings while balancing on a crate. A man in a cloak lined with rat fur performs sleight-of-hand tricks and calls himself the Prestidigitator, which no one can spell. By the end of the day, you have a new shawl, 2 eggs, and a very enthusiastic beat. You've also laughed more in a single afternoon than you have in the past year. But not all trade is cheerful. With goods comes the slow trickle of greed again. A few people begin hoarding things. Salt is hidden, grain is buried. Someone locks away 6 candles and claims they've gone missing. There's a quiet tension creeping in. The old itch of power, status, and the seductive belief that if you control enough turnips, maybe you control your future. And yet, most people just want to feel connected. That's the truth of it. Trading is an excuse to talk, to remember how to negotiate, to feel like a participant in life rather than a leftover from its destruction. You begin traveling a little. Short walks to neighboring villages that now host their own makeshift markets. You see more survivors, each with their own version of strange post-plague normalcy. One place trades exclusively in woven bracelets and cheese. Another uses pebbles as currency, but only if they're visibly interesting. Everywhere you go, people are rebuilding. Slowly, imperfectly, often hilariously. On one trip, you hear about a town that's trying to invent a new calendar. The old days are too confusing, says a woman with 3 missing teeth and a deeply confident tone. Their months include names like Mudshine and Second Summer, again. You trade her a broken comb for a copy of the calendar and decide to celebrate Cabbage Moon just to see what happens. You learn how to haggle, how to smile without showing too many teeth. Some people get nervous. And how to spot when someone is trying to swap you a cursed spoon. You also learn that not everything needs to make sense. Sometimes a handshake and a joke are worth more than a perfect transaction. One day, Thomas returns. He's older looking, more sunburnt, but still wearing that ridiculous feather. He tells you trade is picking up all over. River routes are slowly reopening. There are whispers of ships at sea again, and merchants from faraway places testing the waters, literally and figuratively. He shows you a scrap of dyed silk and a tiny pouch of pepper. You touch the fabric, smell the spice, and feel a sudden surge of possibility. Civilization, in its awkward, lurching way, is crawling back. You ask him what he wants in exchange for the pepper. He thinks for a moment, then smiles. "Tell me a story," he says. So you do. You tell him about the cracked mirror and the beat and the prestidigitator, about the woman who worships mushrooms and the boy who believes your goat can predict the weather. He laughs, gives you the pepper, and moves on. As the sun sets, you sprinkle the spice over a pot of stew. The smell is rich, warm, unexpected. It tastes like something new. You wake up to the sound of construction. Well, construction is generous. It's mostly banging, swearing, and the unmistakable noise of someone accidentally hitting their own foot with a mallet. Still, it's happening. Something is being built. You shuffle outside, rubbing sleep from your eyes, to find half the village gathered around what used to be the ruined barn. Now it's, well, still a ruined barn, but with intentions. Someone, probably Hugo, has hoisted a sign above the doorway that reads in charcoal-smudged block letters, "The School." A few chickens roosting in the rafters stare down judgmentally. You watch as they try to prop up planks, argue about what counts as a door, and draw letters in the dirt with sticks. The entire scene looks like it was designed by a committee of sleep-deprived squirrels. And yet something tugs at you. A flicker of purpose, maybe even hope. Someone wants to learn. You find out later that it started with Bruna teaching a child to write their name using ash and an old wooden shingle. That simple act, one shaky, misshapen name, ignited something. Now, half the village wants to learn letters, numbers, even how to measure things using rope and suspiciously uneven sticks. Historians still argue whether this explosion of post-plague learning laid the groundwork for later renaissances, or if it was just an inevitable side effect of people being stuck with too much time and not enough bread. Either way, you're swept up in it. You volunteer to help, mostly because you're curious, also because they promised snacks. You start by teaching the alphabet, carving letters into pieces of bark. The Q keeps looking like a snail. No, one minds. And here's the quirky bit. Someone starts making up new letters. One child invents a squiggly shape called sloop that supposedly represents the feeling of tripping over a chicken. Everyone loves it. You start incorporating it into the lesson plan. Why not? The chickens remain unimpressed. Soon, the barn fills daily with people of all ages. Children, teenagers, elderly survivors with stiff knees and sharper memories than expected. They sit in circles, squint at chalkboards made from broken slate, and practice writing by candlelight. The whole place smells like determination, old wool, and whatever passed for lunch that day. You begin offering little lessons on arithmetic. Counting turnips becomes a math exercise. Someone figures out fractions using a moldy pie. You witness a debate over whether sharing 3 loaves among 5 people counts as division, or an act of spiritual generosity. One afternoon, a traveling teacher arrives. He's thin, with ink-stained fingers and eyes that have seen too much. He carries a stack of parchment bound together with twine and insists on being called Master Joffrey, even though he still can't pronounce rhetoric. Master Joffrey teaches Latin phrases, sings songs about constellations, and once gets so passionate about the concept of zero that he almost faints. People love him. Children mimic his wild gestures. Adults ask questions with growing boldness. You quietly learn too. Evenings are for huddling near the fire, copying shapes, practicing handwriting, and marveling at how your fingers can still do something new after everything they've been through. There's a growing hunger for knowledge, literal and metaphorical. People bring in scraps of books, old scrolls, anything with words. Someone donates a prayer book with elaborate illustrations. You all gather around it like it's treasure, and in a way, it is. But not everyone is excited. There are skeptics. A few grumble that learning is for nobles and monks, not for people who milk goats and patch roofs. They say the world has ended once already. What good are letters when the soil is poor and wolves still roam? You get it. Fear wears many faces. Change is hard when survival still isn't guaranteed. Still, the momentum grows. Learning spreads like moss, slow, steady, and quietly defiant. A man starts documenting village events on a piece of bark nailed to a wall. Local chronicles, he calls it. It's barely legible, and mostly about chicken theft, but it's a start. You read poetry one night, translated badly, yes, and half missing, but the rhythm, the way the words sway and linger, it moves something in you. You never thought about beauty like that before. Not after everything. But now, you start writing little things. A list. A sentence. A tiny, terrible poem about soup. And you're not the only one. Others write too. Letters to no one. Stories about what it was like before. Fantasies about what the world might become. The barn fills with scribbled notes, pinned to walls and beams, fluttering in the breeze like desperate, lovely wings. One night, you stumble across a heated debate. Someone wants to start teaching girls more than just herbs and prayers. A few protest. It's not the way things were, they argue. But others, louder now, say the old way failed. The old way let them die. Bruna stands up and teaches geometry the next morning. Just starts doing it. No one stops her. You see new confidence on faces that once looked empty. People are making things again. Not just physical objects, but ideas. Opinions. The beginnings of questions that don't have answers yet. One morning, you walk into the barn and see a new phrase scrawled across the far wall. We are still here. You stop. You stare. It's not particularly elegant, but it hits you like thunder in a quiet field. Because it's true. You survived. And now you're doing more than surviving. You're learning. Growing. And in this rickety barn with its leaning walls and judgmental chickens, something miraculous is happening. People are remembering how to be people again. The well runs dry just as the bread goes stale. Not a disaster. Not like the plague or the fire, or that time Bruna accidentally summoned a swarm of bees while trying to bake with lavender. But a problem. A real one. Water is life, after all, and now it's trickling out in pitiful, muddy spurts. You stand at the edge of the stone ring, bucket in hand, watching droplets drip like the last thoughts of a sleepy philosopher. Around you, villagers murmur. Some poke the ground, as if jabbing it harder might bring water back. Hugo claims it's punishment for overwatering his cabbage patch. Someone else blames astrology. You just sigh and go find a shovel. This is how the great post-plague infrastructure renaissance begins. With an empty well and too much dry bread. You gather a small crew. Yourself, a surly widow named Maud, and a teenager who claims he's descended from Romans because his nose is noble-shaped. Together, you set off to find another water source. You bring rope, buckets, a bent ladle, and hope. Mostly hope. And mosquitoes. So many mosquitoes. You hike for hours, poking at rocks, tasting suspicious puddles, and arguing over whether moss truly always points north or just goes wherever it pleases. Finally, you stumble on a slow-moving spring. It's not majestic, but it gurgles with promise. You dip a hand in, taste it, and declare it acceptable. Maud calls it liquid hope. The Roman descendant pees in a bush and declares the mission a triumph. Back home, you announce the find with the solemnity of a prophet. Plans are made, buckets are lined up. A trench is marked, wobbly, crooked, full of dreams. You start digging, and digging, and digging. The soil is dry, then sticky, then full of roots. Your hands blister, your back protests. Every 5 minutes, someone suggests giving up, but you don't. Because the plague stole too much already. This trench, this is defiance in a dirt-streaked line. As you work, others join. Bruna brings lunch. Thomas drops by with a bag of nails and exactly one helpful suggestion. Even the chickens hover nearby, looking suspiciously like they're supervising. Historians still argue whether these kinds of communal rebuilding projects led to the later wave of civic pride across Europe, or if people were just really tired of hauling water in buckets. Either way, your village becomes obsessed with infrastructure. Not just water, roads too. The old paths are overgrown, tangled with vines and regret. You organize a group, the Pathfinders, someone suggests, which sounds a bit dramatic, but it sticks. Armed with axes, rope, and an impressive amount of trail mix, you hack through the underbrush, reconnecting your village with its long-forgotten neighbors. It's during one of these expeditions that you discover a collapsed bridge, or, rather, what used to be a bridge. Now it's just stones, moss, and one surprisingly intact shoe. No one wants to admit how thrilling it feels. A project, a puzzle, a challenge with stakes and mud and the possibility of falling in. You take measurements using your foot. It's not accurate, but it's your foot, so it feels official. Plans are drawn. Timber is scavenged. Someone sketches out ideas using a stick and a pie crust. After weeks of bickering and balancing, something bridge-shaped begins to form. It's rickety. It creaks. The first time someone crosses it, everyone holds their breath. The second time, people cheer. By the 5th crossing, Hugo is charging a toll. The transformation is slow but steady. Every day, something gets patched, propped, or polished. A new roof, a functioning drain, a fence that doesn't lean like it's had too much mead. People take pride in their fixes. A cracked bench becomes a conversation throne. A repaired ladder gets painted with flowers. The word ours gets used more often. You find yourself walking differently. Head up, eyes open. Not just scanning for threats, but admiring. It's strange to feel something like pride. Hope, maybe. Hidden under layers of sawdust and sore muscles. Of course, not everything works. The communal latrine plan ends in tears and mold. The attempt to build a sundial collapses under the weight of debate. Read, arguing about shadows. Someone tries to introduce a water wheel but forgets how wheels work. It sinks. Still, the effort matters. One day, a stranger visits. He's dressed plainly but carries a leather-bound book and the air of someone who remembers. He walks the village slowly, inspecting the new bridge, the working well, the school barn with its fluttering paper wings. He nods. You watch him write something down. Later, you learn he's one of several scribes wandering the land, documenting which places are surviving. He marks your village on his map. You imagine it, a tiny dot on parchment, somewhere between ruined abbey and goat-infested meadow. But it's there. Proof. Word spreads. Other travelers come. Some settle, others trade advice. A woman teaches you how to fire clay bricks. A man shows you how to build a pulley. You teach them how to not die from mushroom soup. The world is reknitting itself, slowly, stitch by uneven stitch. And in this tapestry, this time it's for a meeting. The villagers are gathering, and not because something's on fire or someone's lost a goat, though let's be honest, someone probably has. No, tonight is about deciding things, about talking, about governing. You head toward the square, past makeshift homes and cleaned-up corners, past the bridge that somehow still stands. The sun is low, casting long shadows that stretch like lazy cats across cobbled stones. You feel a little taller. Not physically, obviously, though your back has gotten stronger from all that trench digging, but metaphorically, like you're part of something again. A ring of benches encircles the fire pit, and people shuffle into place. It's not a council exactly. No one has titles or robes. It's more like structured arguing with snacks. A woman from the East Fields brings pickled turnips. Someone hands around cider. Bruna's brought her special talking stick. A literal stick with a ribbon on it that means shut up until it's your turn. And thus, democracy, sort of, is born. You take your seat and listen. At first, it's small things. Who gets to use the new grain bin? Whether Tomas is really exempt from cleanup duties just because of his delicate wrists. But then it grows. Bigger questions. Should travelers be allowed to stay indefinitely? Can land be claimed again? Who owns the ox anyway? Historians still argue whether these post-plague village assemblies were the roots of modern local government, or just a phase between chaos and monarchy round two. But here, now, in this moment, it feels revolutionary. Because you have a voice. You raise your hand. The talking stick is passed to you, still sticky with cider. You speak about building a communal barn, something proper, with tools and dry storage, and maybe even a second floor. People nod. Someone claps. You feel warm, then slightly sticky again from the stick. Of course, not everyone's thrilled. old. Edric insists this is how Rome fell. Too much voting, not enough discipline, he mutters into his beard. We need a leader, not a knitting circle. But no one listens much. Even his beard seems over it. Besides, the village already has leaders. Several, in fact. Bruna for herbs, Thomas, begrudgingly, for repairs. Maud runs food storage. You? You've become the unofficial planner. Mostly because you're the only one who remembers how to draw straight lines in dirt. It's a patchwork of power, but it works. For now. You find that people want to participate. They show up. They share. Someone starts recording minutes. On bark, yes, and with a lot of doodles, but still. It becomes a ritual. Every week, a meeting. Every meeting, a fire. Every fire, decisions, and something else begins to creep in. Fairness. You talk about dividing. Harvests more evenly. About helping widows and orphans. About making sure no one freezes come winter. It's slow, sometimes painful. Emotions flare like overstoked coals. But it happens. A kind of justice begins to emerge. Not the kind in gilded halls, but the kind forged in muddy boots and shared cider. Here's a quirky tidbit. Someone proposes a law requiring all chickens to wear tiny bells so they can't sneak into the grain stores. The motion passes. The chickens are furious. And then one day a visitor arrives bearing news. The old lord is dead. No heir. The manor up the hill, once the center of your fear and taxes, stands empty. Overgrown, silent, eerie as a forgotten dream. This sparks a debate like no other. Do you reclaim it? Move in? Tear it down? Some say it's cursed. Others say it's rightful property now. Maud suggests turning it into a bathhouse. Someone else votes for a library. One bold soul proposes a cat palace. You decide, by vote, to explore it first. A small group goes. You're part of it, of course. The manor looms like a sleeping beast, all stone and ivy and ancient creaks. Inside you find dust, rats, and faded paintings of unsmiling ancestors. But also furniture, tools, ledgers, even books. Books. Actual books. Not prayer books. Not lists of livestock, but stories. Knowledge. Histories. You carry them back like treasure. A second vote is held. It's decided. The manor belongs to everyone now. Parts of it will be cleaned, used, transformed. One wing becomes a storehouse, another a hall for larger meetings. The grand parlor, it becomes a classroom. You help dust the portraits. Someone hangs flowers on the sullen visages. Now the ancestors look vaguely embarrassed. As they should be. This reclaiming feels symbolic. Like you've taken back more than just stone and space. You've taken back authority. The plague didn't just clear people out. It cleared the way. For better? For worse? No one's sure. But it's yours now. And that's a start. More travelers come. They hear about the manor, the school, the talking stick. They bring stories from other villages. Some thriving, some failing. You exchange tips, seeds, laughter. A small alliance begins to form. Nothing official, just nods, promises, shared cider. You begin to wonder if something larger is brewing. A new world. One built not on inherited titles but on pickled turnips and weekly debates. You sit by the fire one night, watching the flames curl like sleepy dancers, and realize you're witnessing the birth of something, maybe even shaping it. You, the same person who once counted days by coughs and funerals, are now counting votes. It's not perfect. Arguments still happen. One meeting dissolves when someone suggests outlawing clapping offbeat. Another ends early when a goat eats the minutes, but it's yours. This village, these people, this process, it's all messy and hopeful and alive. Like you. The first snow falls like an apology. Soft, slow, hesitant, as if nature itself remembers the years when snow meant sealed doors and silence. But this time, you're ready. The grain is stored. The walls are mended. The roof doesn't leak unless you count that one corner that always leaks, no matter what you do, as if the house is emotionally processing something. Still, it's different now. You wake up to the hush of snow piling against shutters and find yourself smiling. Instead of panicking, fires are already lit. Bread is already rising. Someone's singing, off-key, sure, but joyfully. And the village smells like cloves and something slightly burnt. Winter used to mean waiting for death. Now it just means winter. You step outside and sink ankle-deep in powder. Kids are pelting each other with lopsided snowballs. Chickens shuffle through the drifts, outraged. A dog, no one's quite sure whose, tries to catch flakes with its tongue. You pause to savor the cold on your face. It's sharp, but not cruel. Just alive. Inside the manor's great hall, now your multi-purpose whatever room. People gather. Blankets drape from rafters. The fire crackles. Maud is telling a story, her voice low and deliberate, weaving a tale about wolves and forgotten kings and cabbage that grants second sight. Someone's spinning wool in the corner. A pot of something questionable steams gently by the hearth. And you realize this is the new cathedral, not of worship necessarily, but of warmth, of survival, of shared laughter and patched mittens and the long, patient waiting that winter requires. Historians still argue whether the communal spaces that emerged post-plague were acts of necessity or seeds of cultural rebirth. But sitting here, wrapped in a slightly itchy blanket and listening to Bruna snore gently under the influence of mulled cider, you decide it doesn't matter. It's both. You help run the winter rota, a schedule for shared tasks. Wood chopping, stew stirring, snowpath clearing. Everyone has their jobs. Even the Roman-nosed teenager, who now solemnly calls himself Chief Salt Disperser. You let him have it. It keeps him out of trouble. One morning during a snowstorm so thick it swallows sound, a knock comes at the gate. Everyone freezes, literally and also emotionally. You open it to find two travelers wrapped in furs, looking like exhausted ghosts. You bring them in, warm them, feed them, listen. They're from a settlement further north, one that didn't make it. You feel a pit open in your stomach as they talk about hunger, frostbite, desperation. But then they fall quiet. You have music, one says, and soup. It sounds absurd, but in a world still cracked by grief, those two things are miracles. You find space for them. They blend in. One teaches weaving. The other sings lullabies in a language no one recognizes, but everyone loves. A quirky little tradition begins. Snow poetry. Blame Maud, of course. She reads a few lines during supper one night, and the next thing you know, people are reciting verse about icicles and existential. Some are funny. Some are tragic. One is just 20 lines about a missing boot. You write one, reluctantly. It's terrible. Everyone claps anyway. These rituals, the storytelling, the poetry, the singing, become the threadwork of winter. Each evening, you gather like birds roosting, not out of fear, but belonging, and through it all, the snow keeps falling. One night, as you stoke the fire, you remember how it used to be. Huddled in the dark, listening for coughs, keeping tally of who was missing. You remember rationing candle wax. You remember begging bread from a stranger who would later die. You look around now and see light, smell cinnamon, hear someone tuning a lute that's missing 2 strings and a good sense of pitch. Winter didn't get easier. You got stronger. Someone, possibly Hugo, suggests a midwinter festival. To break the bleak, he says, grinning with all 3 of his teeth. The idea catches fire instantly. Plans are made. Decorations are gathered. Bruna starts crafting masks from bark and cloth scraps. You organize a procession. The kids rehearse a play involving a magical turnip and a heroic goose. The festival is ridiculous. There's dancing, and a skit so bad it's brilliant. Someone juggles. Someone else falls into a snowbank and insists it was part of the performance. You laugh until your cheeks hurt, and for a moment the world is golden, not gray. Afterward, you and Maud sit by the fire, sipping something warm and unidentifiable. We're still here, she says quietly. You nod. Not just alive, but living. The season winds on. Some days are hard. A pipe freezes. A barn door blows off. Someone burns the stew beyond all redemption. But you handle it. Together. The fear is still there, curled in some corner. But it's smaller now. Manageable. You start dreaming again. Not of the past, but the future. What could you build next? A windmill? A proper schoolhouse? A bathhouse that doesn't double as a goat shed? You even think about writing. Not just poems about boots, but a real account. A story of what happened. What is happening. Not for scholars, not for gold, but for the kids who'll grow up hearing about the plague as something far away, distant, unreal. You want them to know the truth, the pain, yes, but also the hope, the sheer, stubborn, ridiculous courage it took to keep going. So you sharpen a quill, pull out a piece of birch bark, and begin. Hey guys, tonight we survive. Spring returns, not with a bang, but a slow, muddy sigh. You trudge through fields that look more like mud baths than fertile ground. The snowmelt has turned everything into a slick mess, the kind that steals boots and dignity with equal enthusiasm. Yet, beneath the muck, life stirs. Bulbs push through, tentative and green, as if daring the world to notice their back. This is your second chance, the great rebirth, or at least the great mud fight. Fields need plowing, seeds need planting, tools need fixing. You find yourself elbow deep in dirt, hands raw, heart cautious. The past still clings like stubborn frost. But the future, well, it's growing. You rally neighbors to prepare for planting season. Tomas, still nursing his delicate wrists, shows up with a plow borrowed from a nearby village. Bruna offers herbal remedies for blisters, and the Roman-nosed teenager, now fully committed to his new identity as Chief Salt Disperser, sprinkles salt liberally, though no one's sure if that actually helps. Seeds are sown with hope and half-forgotten songs. You sing together, off-key and earnest, planting turnips, wheat, and barley. Each seed feels like a promise, fragile but alive. Strangely, this period also births a new obsession: crop divination. The village elder swears that the shape of the first sprout predicts the harvest. Some claim that whispering to seeds helps them grow faster. Historians still debate whether such rituals were common or just local quirks fueled by desperation and boredom. Meanwhile, trade begins to pick up. The old barter system returns, sometimes awkwardly. One man tries to trade a jar of honey for a wheelbarrow and ends up with 3 chickens and a suspiciously large potato. You learn quickly that haggling is an art form perfected by those with nothing left to lose. One day, a traveler arrives carrying a rare commodity, a book on crop rotation. It's written in a language no one quite understands but seems promising. Bruna volunteers to decipher it, turning it into an ongoing community project. Suddenly, farming isn't just about survival. It's about knowledge. You also notice a change in people's attitudes. Where once there was a palpable fear of wasting resources, now there's cautious optimism. People talk about saving seed for next year, about planning ahead. It's a small victory but feels monumental. But not everything goes smoothly. A blight hits one of the fields. The turnips, so promising, start to rot. Panic flares. Arguments erupt about whose fault it is. Fingers are pointed at a suspicious goat that's been lurking near the crops. You suggest a goat leash, but the idea is quickly dismissed. Through this, you see a deeper truth. Recovery is messy. There's no clean path, no simple fix. The plague didn't just take bodies. It broke trust, routine, and certainty. Rebuilding means navigating the mess, tolerating setbacks, and sometimes just laughing at the absurdity of it all. You spend evenings with Maud and Bruna, strategizing, sharing stories, and quietly mourning what was lost. Yet, amid the dirt and debate, you feel something new. A quiet resilience that no illness can steal. By the end of the season, the fields are alive again, scarred but fertile. The village gathers to celebrate the first harvest since the plague, sharing food, stories, and a collective sigh of relief. As the sun sets, you look around at the faces glowing in firelight and realize something important. Surviving the plague wasn't just about living through it. It was about living after it. Summer arrives with a blaze of sunlight and sweat. You wake to the buzz of insects and the scent of warm earth baked dry by relentless heat. The village is alive in a different way now. Children run barefoot, their laughter ricocheting off sun-baked walls. Gardens burst with colors you never thought you'd see again. Fiery reds of ripe tomatoes, soft yellow squash, and vines heavy with grapes that smell like sunshine trapped in a bunch. The manor's once dark windows are thrown open to welcome the heat and the inevitable cacophony of cicadas. The air smells of fresh herbs drying on strings, Bruna's specialty, and something less definable but just as comforting: home. You take on new roles, juggling duties like water runner, market, organizer, and occasional diplomat when the occasional traveler stops by with news and goods. A barter market forms near the manor grounds, turning dusty earth into a hub of negotiation, gossip, and the occasional impromptu dance. You marvel at the resilience of people. After so many losses, they still find energy for small joys. A game of pitch and toss, a shared meal under the stars, the crafting of summer wreaths made from wildflowers. One day, a troupe of minstrels arrives, carrying strange instruments and stories from far-off lands. Their songs are unfamiliar but somehow soothing, like a balm for your weary spirit. Historians still argue whether the return of traveling entertainers was a sign of cultural revival, or simply the survival of wandering bards clinging to their trade. You, however, just enjoy the rare distraction. Not all is idyllic. Heat brings its own challenges. Water supplies dwindle. The sun beats mercilessly on crops. There are days when the dust seems to choke the very life out of you, and tempers flare as easily as the midday sun burns. You witness arguments over water rights, one of which ends in a standoff between two stubborn neighbors armed only with watering cans and angry words. It's ridiculous, but also terrifying, a reminder that old scars run deep and resources are still scarce. Yet even in these conflicts, you see glimpses of hope. Solutions emerge: rainwater collection, shared wells, and agreements forged over cups of cold herbal tea. People learn again how to cooperate, to compromise, to rebuild trust. One particularly memorable night, as the village gathers for a midsummer feast, an old ritual is revived. Bonfires blaze, songs rise, faces glow with firelight and smiles. It's not the sacred rites of old, but something new. A celebration of survival, of community, of the stubborn will to keep living. You notice children weaving crowns of flowers and feathers, their innocence a sharp contrast to the heavy history that lingers in the air. A small girl looks at you with bright eyes and asks why you always carry that old quill. You smile and tell her it's for stories, stories that will keep memories alive long after the flames die down. As the evening fades, you lean back against a weathered stone wall, the smell of smoke and sweet grass in your nostrils. The night hums softly, alive with crickets and whispered conversations, and in that moment, you feel it. The pulse of life, messy, unpredictable, and utterly beautiful. The air thickens with rumors, whispers carried on the summer breeze about distant cities and distant plagues, about kings and courts that seem as unreal as fairy tales. You listen, but keep your feet firmly planted in the soil of your village, where life feels raw and immediate. Word arrives that trade routes are reopening, slowly, painfully. A trader from the south arrives one dusty afternoon, his cart creaking, under sacks of salt and bolts of cloth. His stories paint a world trying to breathe again, but still coughing. You trade for seeds and tools, careful to haggle hard. Every barter feels like a lifeline. Among his goods is something odd, A strange-looking compass with a needle that twitches like it has secrets. You're fascinated. Historians still debate when exactly compasses became common in rural Europe. You find comfort in such rituals, in their blend of faith and folklore. They remind you that healing isn't just physical. It's woven through stories and symbols, whispered hopes, and shared glances. One evening, as you sit by the fire, stranger arrives, a scholar no less, curious about your village's unusual self-governance and traditions. He asks questions, takes notes on scraps of parchment, and insists on calling your meetings proto-democratic experiments. You smile politely and invite him to try the talking stick. His eyes widen when no one immediately agrees to hand it over. But he joins anyway, stumbling through the arguments and jokes. You watch him realize that what you've built is messy, imperfect, but real. The scholar departs at dawn, leaving behind a journal filled with observations and questions that will fuel debates for centuries. You close your own journal that night and think, maybe surviving the plague wasn't just about enduring death, but inventing new ways to live. And somehow, that feels like the greatest victory of all. As the long days start to shorten, the village prepares for harvest. The time when the fruits of labor and luck finally meet. The air is heavy with the scent of ripening grain, and the distant hum of bees drunk on wildflowers. You join the rhythmic chorus of sickles slicing through stalks, the sharp rustle of wheat like whispered secrets under your breath. The ground is dusty, your arms tired, but there's a satisfaction that's almost sacred, reaping what you've planted, seeing life unfold from the muck and ash of the past. The harvest festival takes shape, a sprawling celebration fueled by cider, laughter, and too much roasted meat. You help build a makeshift stage where villagers perform plays that blend old myths with new jokes about missing boots and the plague goat that refuses to be tethered. Historians still debate whether these festivals marked genuine cultural renewal or were just desperate attempts to cling to normalcy. To you, they feel like breathing in again after being underwater. Amid the revelry, a curious event unfolds. A traveling herbalist arrives, offering strange tinctures and remedies. One concoction claims to ward off melancholy, made from a mix of lavender, chamomile, and a secret ingredient, crushed nettle leaves. You try it, and, while not quite magical, it does ease the ache of lingering sadness. Stories multiply, too. Tales of neighbors lost, of miracle recoveries, and of hidden caches of grain found buried beneath rubble. A storyteller recounts how a goat once saved an entire family by alerting them to a fire. You laugh, skeptical but grateful for the levity. You also notice new tensions. Land disputes flare as boundaries once forgotten resurface. Old grudges bubble beneath smiles. It's clear the plague didn't just steal lives. It reshaped relationships, sowing seeds of conflict along with hope. In the quiet moments between festivals and work, you and Maud discuss the future. What will the village look like in 10 years? Will there be schools, hospitals, even libraries? Or will fear and scarcity keep tightening their grip? The answers aren't clear, but you both agree on one thing. The past can't be erased, but it can be honored through the stories you pass down. The laughter, the sorrow, the resilience. One evening, as the sun dips behind the hills, you find yourself watching fireflies dance in the twilight. The world feels fragile yet fiercely alive, like the glow of those tiny lights. Brief, beautiful, and fiercely stubborn. You tuck away the quill again, grateful for this moment of peace amid uncertainty. Because, despite everything, life is still here, and so are you. The chill of autumn creeps in, wrapping the village in a quiet cloak of amber and fading light. You feel it in your bones, the subtle shift from lively summer buzz to thoughtful stillness. Leaves fall like whispered farewells, crunching beneath your boots, while smoke from hearth fires curls lazily into the cool sky. The work slows. There's less urgency now, more reflection. You gather with neighbors in the evenings, sharing stories by firelight, the glow flickering on tired faces. Some tales are joyful, like the tale of the miraculous goat that somehow outwitted a pack of wolves. Others are harder to hear, the stories of those who never returned, their names etched into the fabric of your collective memory. Historians still debate how communities coped emotionally after the plague, whether silence or storytelling was the preferred balm. Here, you find both necessary. One night, Maud brings out a battered harp. Her fingers coax a soft melody that fills the room, carrying a sense of mourning and hope intertwined. You close your eyes and let the music carry you somewhere beyond, the smoke and stone. As harvest ends, preparations begin for the lean months ahead. Food is stored carefully. Plans are made for sharing resources fairly. You oversee a registry, ensuring no one is forgotten or left wanting. A task that weighs heavily, but feels vital. You notice a change in yourself, too. The sharp edge of fear dulls, replaced by a steady resolve. The plague once threatened to unravel everything, but now you see threads pulling tighter, connections forged in hardship and kindness. Small innovations appear. Neighbors exchange not only goods, but skills. You barter lessons in weaving for help repairing a fence. Someone teaches you a new way to preserve herbs. The village becomes a patchwork quilt of shared knowledge and goodwill. Yet, the scars remain. You sometimes wake from dreams haunted by memories, faces blurred but emotions sharp. But you also wake to laughter, to the warmth of friendship, to the simple act of breathing. In this season of endings and beginnings, you realize that surviving the plague wasn't just about living day to day. It was about rebuilding a world where life, in all its messy, beautiful imperfection, could thrive again. And as the last leaves drift down, you prepare to face whatever comes next, armed with stories, community, and a stubborn spark of hope. Winter returns like an old, unwelcome guest, bringing with it a familiar chill and the heavy silence of long nights. You trudge through snow-dusted paths, breath rising in soft clouds, and the village seems quieter, thoughtful, even somber. You find yourself wrapped in layers of worn wool, the scratchy warmth a small comfort against the biting cold. Fires burn, low in hearths, casting flickering shadows that dance like ghosts on the walls. The year's work is done, yet the weight of survival lingers. You gather with others in close quarters, sharing what little warmth and stories you can. The candlelight flickers softly as voices blend, sometimes quiet, sometimes laughing, often wistful. The village has changed. You notice how faces have softened, etched with lines not just from age, but from endurance. Children, once fragile, now run with reckless joy through the snow, their energy a defiant pulse against the silence. You recall the strange superstitions that flourished post-plague, like the belief in the plague stone or the protective power of certain herbs. These small rituals, half believed but wholly embraced, thread through the community like invisible stitches mending wounds. Historians still argue whether these customs were born from genuine faith or desperate hope, but for you, they've become a comforting rhythm in an unpredictable world. As you sit by the fire one evening, Maud hands you a simple wooden carving, an owl, symbolizing wisdom and watchfulness. It's rough-hewn, imperfect, much like the village's recovery. But it's yours, a talisman of resilience. You think back to the darkest days, the silence, the sickness, the fear, and marvel at how far you've come. Not just surviving the plague, but surviving the aftermath. The rebuilding, the reinvention, the return to life's chaotic dance. The scholar's journal, the strange compass, the goat that couldn't be leashed, all memories that weave into the tapestry of your story. Outside, snow falls gently, muffling the world in white calm. You breathe deeply, feeling the quiet strength of this moment. The future remains uncertain, but tonight, wrapped in shared warmth and stories, you know one thing for sure. Survival isn't just about escaping death. It's about embracing life, however flawed and fragile it may be. And with that thought, you let your eyes close, surrendering to the gentle pull of sleep, ready to dream of spring's muddy promise once again. The night winds down slowly now, like the final notes of a lullaby fading into silence. Your breathing steadies, the worries of the day dissolving into soft shadows. The fire's glow dims, leaving only the memory of warmth. Outside, the world rests beneath a blanket of snow, quiet and still. In this serene pause, remember that every hardship leaves behind a seed of hope. The plague took much, but it could never steal the stubborn spark that drives us to rebuild, to reconnect, and to dream. So as your mind drifts into the gentle embrace of sleep, know that you carry forward the stories of those who lived, loved, and survived. Their voices whisper in the night, urging you onward. Rest now, wrapped in the quiet strength of life's fragile beauty. Good night, dear traveler.